Arizona Territory. 1882, the heat hadn't let up for 6 straight days, and by the 7th morning, Beatrice Langley was ready to set the whole town of Dry Creek on fire with it. She stood at the edge of the mercantile's porch, squinting across the dusty street while the preacher's wife whispered behind her back again. "She should be married by now," Mrs. Turner muttered to another woman, loud enough for Beatrice to hear. 31 and still living alone in that God-forsaken ranch house. It ain't proper. Beatrice didn't flinch. She had heard it all before. Ever since her parents died and she took over the ranch, they had been saying the same thing, that she was too proud, too stubborn, too alone. She adjusted the sack of flour under her arm and stepped off the porch, holding her head high as she crossed the street toward her wagon. But as she reached it, her boot caught a rut, and she stumbled forward just as someone caught her by the arm. "Careful there, miss," a man said, his voice deep and rough like gravel and whiskey. She looked up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair curling from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His face was sun-browned, jaw marked by a few days' stubble. His eyes were gray. "Thank you," she said, steadying herself. "You always walk like you're daring the ground to fight you," he asked, not teasing, just curious. She narrowed her eyes. "You always catch women you do not know." He gave a small shrug and stepped back. "Only when they look like they might faceplant into a wheel spoke." She climbed onto the wagon and stared down at him. "You new to Dry Creek, Ian Prescott," he said, tipping his hat. "Just got in from the border towns. I'm headed north." "Heard there's work up that way." She nodded, then looked ahead, already reaching for the reins. "But you're from here," he said. "Yes." He glanced toward the town, then back at her. "They talk about you like you are a ghost. One they are not sure they want to see in daylight." She tilted her head. "You always speak like that." "Only when I mean it." Beatrice gave a short nod and flicked the reins. As the wagon rolled off, she did not look back, but she felt his eyes follow her the whole way down the road. Beatrice lived 10 miles outside of town, alone except for the 2 boys she had taken in a year ago. Their mother, her cousin, had left them on her doorstep and never came back. "Miss B," the oldest, Jesse, called as she drove up. He was 9, his younger brother, Jonah, only 6. They stood side by the corral, Jesse holding a crooked rake like a weapon, Jonah already barefoot. "They behave?" she asked, climbing down. Jesse nodded. "Jonah tried to eat a bug again." Jonah shrugged. "It was shiny." She sighed but smiled. These boys had been through too much already to scold over a beetle. She carried the flour inside, set it on the worn counter, then looked out the window as the sun started to drop. The sky turned gold and the wind picked up dust from the road. And there, riding up slowly, was the same man from town, Ian Prescott. He dismounted, tied his horse, and tipped his hat when she opened the door. "I passed an old trail about 5 miles back. Almost lost my horse in a gopher hole. I figured I'd ask if there's a better way north." She folded her arms. "There is, but it is not marked, and most men do not ride this way unless they are looking to get shot or hired." His eyes flicked to the boys in the yard. Jesse had stepped close, watching him. Jonah peeked from behind the porch post. "I'm not looking to steal or hurt anyone," Ian said. "I can work. I know cattle, horses, fences. I just need a place to sleep a few nights." Beatrice hesitated. She had not let a man near her land in over 2 years. Not since the last one tried to take what was not his. Jesse stepped closer to her. "We could use help, Miss B. That post near the barn is leaning again." Ian kept quiet, just watching her, waiting. Beatrice finally nodded. "You can sleep in the loft. The barn gets cold at night." "I have known worse." 2 days passed. He worked without being asked, fixed the fence, patched the barn roof, even helped Jonah when the boy got a splinter. He said little, but when he did speak, it was honest, never soft, never cruel. Beatrice found herself watching him from the kitchen window, the way he moved, steady and sure. The way Jesse followed him around like a shadow. The way Jonah laughed when Ian lifted him over the fence like he weighed nothing. That night, she brought him a plate of stew. "You do not owe me that," he said, taking it with a nod. "Maybe I do not," she said, settling on a hay bale nearby, "but I do not like debts hanging over my house." He looked at her for a long moment. "Time is not a debt," he said finally. "Neither is kindness." Beatrice glanced away, the words settling somewhere deep in her chest. "You planning to stay long?" she asked after a pause. "I do not plan much. Life moves whether I want it to or not." He looked at her. "But I could stay, if you wanted that." She felt her throat tighten. "You do not know me. I know the way you look at those boys. I know you run this land better than most men I have seen. I know the town talks and you do not care. That tells me a lot." They sat in silence. The barn creaked. A horse snorted. The stars blinked above them like 1,000 secrets. Then she stood. "There's more fencing needs mending tomorrow. I will be up early." She turned to go, then paused. "Good night, Mr. Prescott. Good night, Miss Langley." As she walked back to the house, the air cooler now, she realized something strange. For the first time in years, she was not lonely. Not really. And that scared her more than anything else. The wind shifted on the third morning, carrying the scent of creosote and distant rain. Beatrice stood barefoot on the porch, coffee cooling in her hand, eyes fixed on the horizon where the clouds gathered low and dark along the far ridgeline. She had always read weather like a map, knew what winds meant hail, what stillness meant dust, what smell meant flood. This wasn't flood. But it wasn't nothing. Behind her, Jonah's quiet humming drifted through the open door. He was stringing horsehair onto a bent stick he'd found, trying to make something like a fiddle. Jesse was outside already, lifting stones from the fence line with Ian's help. Ian didn't ask what needed doing anymore. He just saw it. That unsettled her more than she liked to admit. At midday, she found him kneeling in the field behind the house, hands deep in the soil where the last planting had failed. He didn't look up when she approached, just held up a faded kernel from the earth. "This ground's tired," he said. "You've been working it too hard in the same place. I don't have the water to stretch the rows farther. You will if you dig west. There's a runoff line back there. Shallow but steady." Her gaze shifted toward the western slope, thick with mesquite and rock. "That terrain's rough. I've cleared worse." She crossed her arms. "You offering to pickaxe a channel through 1/2 mile of thorn brush? I'm offering to try." He stood, brushing dust from his knees. There was no boasting in his voice, no challenge, just steady intention. "Why?" she asked. "You need it." She didn't answer. Didn't know what answer to give. Instead, she turned back toward the house, calling for Jesse to bring the tools. By dusk, the first line had been marked with stones. Jesse followed Ian's every move, copying how he measured the gradient with a length of twine and a tin weight. Jonah brought them water in a dented tin cup, half of it spilled by the time he arrived. Beatrice watched them from the porch, mending the hem on Jonah's only good shirt. That night, after the boys were asleep, she found Ian outside the barn, saddle slung over the fence, oiling the leather in the dim light of a lantern. She leaned against the post beside him. "You've been in wars," she said, not asking. He ran the cloth along the strap, slow and even. "Mexico. Then South Texas. Some bounty work I'm not proud of. You don't talk about it. Most of it shouldn't be talked about." She didn't press. The silence between them was different than the silence she held with others. It didn't press into her chest or make her feel absent. It made room. He looked over at her. "You ever think about leaving this place?" "I did once," she said. "After the fire. But the land stayed and I couldn't bear to let it go." He nodded, looked back to his work. I've never stayed in one place longer than a season. Why now? He didn't answer right away. The oil soaked into the leather, darkening it. I don't know. Maybe I'm tired of chasing things that don't wait to be caught. She looked down at the earth between their boots. This land doesn't run, but it doesn't forgive easy either. I'm not asking it to forgive. She met his eyes then. The lantern light caught the gray in them, made them look like worn stone. You hungry? She asked. I could eat. She turned toward the house. There's cornbread left from supper and beans. He followed without a word. Inside, the lamp on the table flickered low. She dished out the food while he washed at the basin. The boys slept in the back room, their breathing steady and loud in the quiet house. When they sat, she didn't speak for a long time. Neither did he. They ate in rhythm, spoons scraping quietly, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Afterward, he stood and took their plates to the basin without being asked. She watched the way he moved, like every motion had been carved from years of muscle and necessity. You got anyone waiting for you somewhere? She asked. No. No family. Had a sister. She died in Kansas. Fever took half the town. After that, I stopped writing letters. She nodded once. You, she looked toward the darkened room where the boys slept. Those two are all I have now. He didn't look away from her. That's not nothing. No, she said. It's not. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. The rain hadn't come yet, but it would. And when it did, it would change everything. She reached for the lamp and lowered the flame. Good night, Mr. Prescott. He paused at the door, hand on the frame. Sleep well, Miss Langley. When the door closed behind him, she stood alone in the dark, her hands resting on the table edge. The air inside the house felt different. Not warmer, not colder. Just changed, like something had shifted in the bones of it. She didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, she let herself breathe deeper. And for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. 3 roosters called against the pale sky, and the first threads of sunlight poured over the ridge where the mesquite thinned. Beatrice stood by the trough, sleeves rolled, arms wet to the elbow, rinsing the last of the grit from the water buckets. She'd woken early, earlier than usual, and couldn't shake the restlessness from her bones. Something about the air, it carried a quiet weight, like a thought someone hadn't finished. Ian had already set off west with a shovel and the small hand saw, tracing the contour of the runoff line. Jessie had gone with him, not even asking. Beatrice had let them go without a word, though her eyes had lingered on the trail long after they disappeared. Jonah sat cross-legged on the dirt nearby, bent over a cluster of stones he was sorting by color. He didn't speak much in the mornings. She liked that about him. As the sun climbed, she saddled the mule and packed a length of canvas and a line of dried apples. The barn roof still held, but the smokehouse needed patching, and she wouldn't wait for it to fail. Before leaving, she tied a note to the porch rail for Ian. Gone to smokehouse. Back before dark. The trail there wound south past a dry creek, then cut through a field of low sage before rising toward the outcrop where the smokehouse sat, half hidden in the slope. They hadn't used it since spring, when the last hog was salted down. She worked through the morning, replacing a warped beam with one she'd milled herself back in April, lifting it into place with only a rope and stubbornness. Her hands blistered beneath the gloves, but she didn't stop until the wall stood even again and the roof no longer sagged. By the time she finished, the light had cooled, stretching long across the clearing. She took a seat on the stone bench carved into the hill and pulled a strip of apple from the pouch. Behind her, boots crunched over dry grass. You always fix things that don't ask to be fixed, Ian asked, stepping into view. You always sneak up quiet as a thief, she replied, not startled. He sat beside her, pulling off his gloves. Jessie is helping Jonah clean the tack. He said you might be here. You find the water line, he nodded. It veers sooner than I thought. We can dig in from the east side instead. Soil's looser there. Beatrice passed him a strip of apple. You plan on staying long enough to finish it. He ate in silence, chewing slow. When he answered, his voice was quiet. If it's all right by you. She didn't look at him. Just watched the sun dip below the far ridge. I kept waiting, she said finally, for someone to say something right. Something that'd make it easier to let go of being alone. He didn't fill the silence that followed. She was grateful for that. I thought it'd be a feeling, she added. Some sudden pull, but it's not. He turned his head slightly, waiting. It's just less noise. Less weight. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When I was younger, I thought people only stayed if you gave them a reason, something big, something loud. Now I think it's the quiet things that hold. Beatrice glanced toward him. Like knowing someone can work beside you without needing to talk all the time. Like handing them a tool and not needing to explain why. Her throat tightened. She looked away. He stood then, brushing off his trousers. We'll need to start early if we want the trench dug before the rains come. She rose too, brushing her hands on her skirt. You'll need a better shovel. I'll take the one near the well. It's still good steel. They started back together, walking slow, the mule trailing behind. The sky above them turned copper and the air grew cooler with each step. Halfway down the trail, Ian said, "That boy of yours, Jesse, he watches everything. Never seen a child so careful." "He's had reason to be," she said. "You've given him something steady. That matters." "Don't think he doesn't know it." Beatrice didn't answer. But when they reached the yard and Jesse came running to meet them, face smudged with dirt, hands full of saddle soap, she reached out and rested a hand on his shoulder. Later, after supper, while the boys drifted into sleep on their straw pallets, Beatrice stepped onto the porch. Ian was already there, seated on the top step, sharpening the blade of his pocket knife. She came to sit beside him without speaking. "After a while," he said, "they said you should be married by now." She let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. "They've been saying that since I was 20. He turned the blade once, catching the lamplight. "Most people don't understand time unless it's wrapped in someone else's expectations." Beatrice looked at him. "And you? I think time's not a debt. It's just a path, and people walk it different ways." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then softly, "You think ours might run the same way now?" He closed the knife and set it beside him. "If you wanted to." Beatrice reached for his hand, resting hers atop it. Her palm was calloused but warm against his. "I do." Neither of them moved. They didn't have to. Inside, the boys breathed steady in their sleep. The stars blinked above the roofline, and for the first time in years the quiet wasn't empty. It was full and growing, the trench cut crooked through the brushland now, half finished but promising. By the fifth morning of work, the earth was giving easier, its rocky resistance softened by Ian's persistence and Jesse's growing strength. Beatrice stayed back that day, tending to the winter onions that had started to bolt along the west fence. The soil was light there, better than she remembered, and she planted the last of the seed without hurry. When she stood and wiped the grit from her hands, she realized how quiet the yard had become. Jonah was kneeling beside the henhouse, whispering something to the red hen that had taken to following him. A hawk circled far above, drifting without urgency. By late afternoon, Ian and Jesse returned. Jesse's shirt clung wet to his back, a new tear across the shoulder. Ian's hands were caked with dirt to the wrists, and his hat brim hung low over his eyes. Neither spoke as they reached the trough. Jesse plunged his face into the water. Ian rinsed his arms, then leaned against the rail, letting the shade settle over him. Beatrice stayed by the porch, watching. When the light cooled and the supper pot hung steady over the fire, She ladled out portions while Ian finished splitting a small stack of cedar by the barn. Jessie and Jonah ate cross-legged by the hearth, their talk low and aimless. Ian joined her on the porch steps, bowl in hand. For a long while they ate without speaking, then Beatrice set her spoon aside. "I found a letter in the old flour tin, one my mother wrote but never sent, to my aunt in Missouri." Ian turned slightly toward her. She talked about the land like it had moods. Said it held on to grief if you didn't walk it every day. I thought she was being poetic. Beatrice looked out toward the dark line of the ridge. But I think she was right. Ian rested the bowl on his thigh. "You think it holds grief? I think it holds everything we don't say. Until we make room for something else." He didn't answer immediately, just watched the sky darken behind the barn. "I buried my sister myself," he said at last. "No preacher, no words, it was just me and the shovel. I kept her locket, though. She wore it since she was 10. Beatrice didn't look at him. "You wear it, it stays in my saddlebag. I take it out when I don't want to forget who I used to be." She nodded slow. "I kept my father's ledger. Even after the fire took half of it, it has his handwriting in it. That's all I have left of his voice." Neither of them moved for a long while. The night deepened. Somewhere beyond the corral, a coyote called and was answered. "You planning to ride north when the trench is done?" she asked. "I was," he said. She let the silence sit between them, unforced. "But then Jessie asked me if I'd ever helped birth a calf before," Ian added. "Like he assumed I'd be here when spring came." Beatrice glanced toward the window, where moonlight touched the boys' sleeping forms. "I've never asked anyone to stay," she said. "I know." He looked at her then, eyes steady. "But I'll stay, Beatrice, if you want that." She didn't answer at once. Instead, she reached for the edge of his sleeve and brushed a bit of dirt from the cuff. Her hand lingered just long enough. "I want that," she said. He nodded once. "Then I'll stay." Beatrice rose, stepping inside without another word. Ian remained on the step, watching the sky. Later, when he came inside, her lamp was still lit. She had left a folded length of canvas and his saddlebag by the door. The message was clear. Not a welcome forced. Not charity extended. A place made for him. He turned down the cot in the corner, the one she'd once used for guests, and set the saddlebag beside it. Before lying down, he pulled the small velvet locket from the inner pocket and held it a moment in his hand. Then he set it on the table by the lamp and let the quiet hold him. Outside, the trench waited. The ground, turned and softened, had begun to listen. The trench finished in the early dusk of a cloud-heavy Wednesday. Ian and Jessie laid the last stone where the channel met the low basin, and the two of them stood together, backs bent in quiet approval. Beatrice watched from the ridge above, arms crossed over her chest, not speaking until Ian turned to look up at her. "It'll carry," he said. "First good rain, you'll see the water settle here." She nodded, her voice low. "It'll be enough." Jessie walked off toward the barn without needing to be asked, his steps slower than usual but sure. He'd grown these past weeks not just in height, but in how he moved. Less like a boy waiting for orders, more like someone who knew his place in the world had been earned. That night, Beatrice carried a folded quilt to the cot Ian had slept on since the first week. He was brushing dust from his shirt, half turned toward the window, when she spoke. "I cleared the old room," she said. "The one my father built on the north side." He didn't answer right away, just looked at her with something steady in his eyes. "There's a real bed in there," she added, "and a peg for your coat." He set the shirt aside. "You sure?" "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." He stepped closer, but not all the way. "I've never had a door that stayed closed behind me before. Not in any place I slept." "Then maybe it's time you had one." She lifted her chin slightly, not daring softness, but offering what she had: space, choice, a place made ready. He looked at her a long moment more, then gave a quiet nod. "I'll move my things." That night she found his saddlebag by the hearth, empty. His boots were lined beside the north room's door. The cot in the corner stood bare. The next morning the rain came. It started light, just a hush across the porch roof, then thickened into a steady rhythm. By noon, water trickled down the new trench, clear and cold, curling into the basin with slow purpose. Beatrice stood under her hat watching it, arms wrapped around her middle. Ian joined her without speaking, hands in his coat pockets. The rain darkened his collar, but he didn't seem to mind. She tilted her head toward the water. "You did good work." "We did." She looked at him, eyes narrowed slightly. "You always say things like that. Like you've been here longer than you have." "I feel like I have." "You're not afraid of staying," he shook his head. "I'm afraid of wasting time, not of staying." She let the silence stretch, broken only by the water sliding through the rocks. "I've never said it plain," she said. "But I want you here, not just for the work. Not just for the boys, I know. I don't want you riding out come spring. I won't." He reached out then, not quick, not bold, just certain, and rested his hand against hers where it lay on the porch rail. She didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined without ceremony, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. That evening, Jessie and Jonah sat on the floor near the hearth, carving soap into shapes with blunt knives. Ian stood behind them, one hand resting on Jessie's shoulder, the other holding the ledger Beatrice had given him to look through. "Your father was neat," he said. "Clean lines." "He kept everything balanced," she replied. "Every gain, every loss." "Then I think he'd be proud of what you've done." She looked at the boys, then at him. "I think he'd be surprised." He smiled, not wide, but with warmth that reached his eyes. Surprised and proud can walk together. That night they sat by the fire after the boys had gone to bed, her sewing in hand, his long legs stretched out before him. She stitched without rush, the needle moving with measured care. Ian watched her hands, then the curve of her cheek. "I want to build something here," he said. "Not just mend what's broken. I want to plant, raise, build. With you." She set her sewing down. "I want that too. You sure?" "I've been sure since I saw you lift Jonah over the fence like he was made of breath. I just didn't know how to say it." He leaned in then, slow and careful, and kissed her. It wasn't rushed, wasn't fierce. It was quiet, like everything else between them, earned, steady, sure. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "We'll have to build out the barn come spring," she whispered. "The roof won't hold another year. We'll do it together." They sat that way, the fire low, the storm moving on. The smell of wet earth drifted through the open window, and the night held nothing but peace. Years passed. The water line held. So did the roof. So did Ian's boots by the north door. By the following spring, the basin had turned green at the edges, and a second mule had been added to the team. Jonah read aloud from the Psalms most evenings, his voice clear and slow. Jessie worked the fields beside Ian, his back straight, his smile rare but real. And Beatrice, still sharp-eyed, still steady, walked each row with a ledger under her arm and the wind at her back. They married under the cottonwood near the creek, the one that flowered white every April. No guests beyond the boys and the preacher who came once a month. She wore a blue dress that used to be her mother's. Ian wore his best shirt and a hat she'd shaped to fit his head. They didn't speak vows loud, just looked at each other, and that was enough. Years later, folks in Dry Creek still whispered about the woman who ran her ranch without help, until she didn't have to anymore. But those who visited saw more than that. They saw a home built from quiet hands, from stitched seams, from water carried and meals shared. They saw two people who had chosen each other without noise, without need for proof. And they saw love the kind that didn't have to announce itself, because it had already rooted deep in the soil, and bloomed without apology.